All right, it is May 18th and it is 5:33 p.m. This is the May meeting of the Sustainability Commission. I will turn it over to our chair, Roy Clark.
Good evening. The May 18th meeting of the Palm Springs Sustainability Commission is now called to order. Tracy, will you do the roll call, please?
Certainly. Vice Chair McCann.
Present.
Commissioner Baker.
Here.
Commissioner Flanagan.
Here.
Commissioner Friedman.
Here.
Commissioner Futterman. Commissioner Garrett.
Here.
Commissioner Gauthier.
Here.
Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Ocanius.
Here.
And Commissioner Torrens.
Here.
And
Chair Clark.
Here.
And Tracy, I did think, did we hear from Jennifer that she was not going to be able to make it tonight?
We did hear in advance from Jennifer
Okay.
that she was feeling under the weather.
Okay. And Lonnie will probably join us.
It appears that we may have one or two visitors here tonight. Tracy, could you ask the visitors to identify themselves and their city or organizational affiliation for the record?
Yes. Mr. Talkington, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, this is Mark. I put together a neighborhood newsletter called the Palm Springs Post. So I'm just here to watch and report on the leaf blower thing, if you guys bring that up.
Wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome, Mark, and welcome to all the commissioners. For our visitor, there will be a time for public comment later in the meeting. If you'd like to speak, I'd ask everybody to keep your microphones muted during the meeting and then raise your hand to be called to speak and then unmute your microphone. Sometimes that doesn't work very well because we can't see everybody all at the same time. So if you'd like to speak and you're raising your hand and nobody addresses you, please just speak up to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak at the appropriate time. The next item on the agenda is the acceptance of the agenda. I'd like to like this a little bit based upon the way it's done in some other meetings, rather than having a motion to accept and a discussion and a vote. I'd like to ask if there are any objections to the agenda, which was emailed and posted last Thursday, May 13th. And if there are none, then we will accept the agenda. Hearing no objections, the agenda is accepted. And now we'll move on to staff comments. Patrick covered a number of things in his memo and the agenda packet.
Yeah, we had a lot of information in that memo, so I don't know that I have any additional updates to what was in that memo. So if anybody has any questions on the items in there, I'm happy to answer them. All right.
So hearing no questions on the staff comments, we'll move on to public comments. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment? There are none. Moving along, there are no presentations scheduled. And then the next item on the agenda is the meeting minutes, which were emailed and posted on Thursday, May 13th. And I'd like to go through the same process as with the agenda. Are there any objections to the meeting minutes or corrections? Hearing none, then the meeting minutes from the April 20th meeting are approved. And we'll move into old business, which is Patrick.
Sure, thank you. So the first item on the old business list is leaf blower ordinance enhancement discussion. So I wanted to talk with the commission a little bit about leaf blower enforcement and potential enhancements to the process. We have talked about this in the past, and a few of the items that I noted in the memo have been discussed by this group before and supported by you. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more detail about some of the other items on that list as well. So we had an internal meeting on last Thursday to discuss these items and other things related to leaf blower enforcement. And so the conversation really revolved around the whole process of identifying people who were violating, to writing a citation, to issuing business licenses, to make sure we know who people are. And I did a little bit of research prior to that meeting to understand how citations were issued, how they were followed up on in terms of payment. And it's clear that we have a lot of improving that we could do with regard to the enforcement process. And so I wanted to go through a couple of those things with you tonight. In the analysis that I did, as I stated in the memo, we certainly always struggle with staffing resources when it comes to enforcement. We also have a response challenge with regard to leaf blowers. As you know, it's hard to get out to them in time to see them actually using the blower. We've had a lot of false alarms, especially lately. Some of them are actually false alarms, others are not false alarms, but they appear to be that whenever the code enforcement person shows up. And we've got a number of challenges related to capturing information about violators as well. So because all of them don't have business licenses, we can't necessarily refer to a business license for that information. And we rely on the accuracy of the notes taken by whoever is in the field. And so sometimes you don't hear correctly, sometimes you don't transcribe it correctly, et cetera. So we face a challenge on that front too, making sure that all the information captured is accurate. And so anyway, so we had some internal conversations about this, and we've identified about 5 or 6 areas that we think we could target for improvement. So the first item is related to business licenses. As I mentioned, a lot of the gardeners don't have business licenses. I think some of them out of concern about documentation, others out of concern perhaps about taxes or tax implications. But really a business license is really just an identifier for anybody who wants to do business in the city. So we can easily encourage everybody to get a business license. Even if you're undocumented, you can still get a state ID that you could provide as information about who you are, even if you are undocumented. So again, I think that we can get around some of the challenges that are faced there. The other thing that came up in our conversations was that, in fact, if business licenses are issued to somebody who's out of the city, it's double the price as it is for those inside the city. So a lot of our gardeners come in from elsewhere. So again, they're facing higher prices than other folks might face. So I think one of the things I'm going to follow up with our business license folks about is, number one, is trying to identify a more streamlined process for our gardeners to get a business license, and also figure out if there's a way to reduce their fee regardless of where they are from. So I think there are improvements that we can make on the business license front. And again, that will help us in terms of identifying who potentially violators are, but it also might help us just get the word out to people easier in terms of opportunities for incentives and things like that.
What's the current fee?
So it's actually not that much. I think it's around $65. So it's not super high, but again, if you're talking about, it also has to do with the number of employees, so it can go up. So it can get fairly expensive if you're a larger operation, but presumably you would be able to pay it if you were larger. So the other thing that they do that was surprising, that they do actually issue stickers for businesses, but they're only about 2 inches long. And so I don't know that people are that inclined to actually use them, nor would we necessarily be able to see them very easily if they had them. Jim.
I have a question about false alarms, and I've had a couple of people ask me, well, why is it that leaf blowers are illegal, but edgers and blower and mowers and clippers. I mean, there's like 8 other things that are all gas powered, but one of them is not allowed. Was there logic behind that, or just the unlucky luck of the draw?
I don't know. Roy can maybe speak to how they zeroed in on leaf blowers, but I think they're more universal. Like trimming goes on every once in a while, but leaf blowers are much more constant, and so that could have been part of the issue.
Patrick,
Okay.
to that, what I've noticed, and I walk 4 times a day in the movie colony and also Las Palmas. Las Palmas are larger states, so they usually pull the trucks in, you can't see it. But this end of the movie colony, it's the crews come and go, but they work for the contractor. I have been able to get the name. It is not comfortable taking photographs because I'm surrounded by them and it's just too obvious. But I have gotten the crews, the actual contractor who then jobs it out to the crews. I have seen, but not able to photograph them using the gas-driven leaf blowers, but it's the small gasoline lawnmowers that I've noticed that are quite common.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought, is it about the gasoline or is it about the dirt and all of that? So, but it's very difficult to get a discrete picture.
Right. Roy, did you have any other comments about that? Yeah.
Just going back to 2016, the commission had a study session with the city council in June, I believe it was. And the main reason for the study session was to approve the sustainability plan. But at that meeting, the council explicitly asked the commission to look into banning gas-powered leaf blowers. They didn't mention the other equipment. There had been an attempt to work that issue about 3 years earlier, and for some reason it stalled. But it was in 2016 that the effort started. And predominantly, the biggest complaint from residents, and we had public comment sessions and so forth, was the noise of the leaf blowers.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and I do believe that there is state level legislation on this issue that's being developed. And it does sound like there is going to be more of a mandate to go electric for leaf blowers and lawn mowers and some other tools as well, lawn tools as well. So, so I do think that more change is going to happen here. So the better that we do at this, I think the less traumatic it's going to be down the road for folks that have to switch over. So any other questions about business licenses in particular?
Yeah, Patrick, I was only with difficulty able to find where the business license information is on the city website. It is yet another sort of burying essential information. It's under finance and treasury, but if you can put it in the search bar, business licenses, but it really should be a lot more user friendly. And second, and that also goes to the next point about holding homeowners responsible, I did not see anywhere where you could search exactly who has a business license, and we should not try to hold the homeowners any, sort of liable for, certainly for that, for having an unlicensed gardener, if there's no way to determine, at least in an obvious way. So I realize the website is always a work in progress at City Hall, but as the process gets updated and streamlined, would ask that you look into making that information more available, both for the gardeners and also for the homeowners, so that they can make sure that if they're getting a new gardener, or just every year, that they could follow up with a gardener and say, hey, you friendly reminder that you need to do that. And also, I recall, and this can be linked in the materials, when we were working on the water efficient landscaping ordinance back in 2015, there is, I believe, a requirement that the gardeners take a course that's been developed with College of the Desert for all of the local water agencies. So that also information can be posted there to remind people. I believe it's a requirement, and whether it's every year, every other year, but I believe there is a link for the gardener's license that they take that course.
Great point. And good point about the having things in available for people, the public to see. I didn't necessarily think about that, but that is a good point. Jake, you got a hand up.
Yeah, and it's good that there's the piece about a license. How do homeowners learn about the requirements so that not only they could help us make sure that they're hiring people that use the appropriate equipment? That's one question. And second, I was staying in a sublet at a HOA, like a big condo development, and they were using gas powered materials like equipment all the time. And I didn't want to, I brought it to the attention of the host and said, hey, and directed them to the website and said, we've got these scholarships, you should let them know. I haven't filed anything. So I feel like, how are we prioritizing figuring out where to like address this so that, you know, homeowners know that they should also help us, because we are, you know, a few number of people, compliance is a challenge, going around and finding them is a challenge, but also like empowering everyone to kind of like raise their hand and say, you know, click it, ticket kind of thing.
Right. So originally when the ordinance went through, we did issue a letter to all residents about the ordinance and the requirements. However, as you all know, we've had huge turnover in the city and lots of home sales. So actually, Tracy and I just recently downloaded the current list of property transactions from 2019. So for the past 2 years, so there were about 4,000 property transfers. And so what we were going to do is send a letter out. And actually, it's more of a sustainability message. So give people information about recycling, about leaf blowers, about other sorts of things. So it would be kind of a sustainability welcome letter. So we're trying to get that together and get that out to people. And we would certainly do a broad outreach campaign if we did, if council did agree to put forward or kind of make homeowners accountable. So that would certainly be a large outreach campaign to do that. And I think part of what the challenge that we have, and I've noticed, is that it seems to be a lot of residents that aren't here very much, or that have Airbnbs or vacation rentals. You know, they're not here, they're not monitoring for that kind of stuff. We do try to track them down whenever we get complaints. But again, since they're not here, they don't necessarily follow up with the gardener and see them. We had just a quick anecdote. We did have a gentleman that a neighbor complained about their gardener quite often. And we kept notifying him that this was a problem, and he kept pushing back on us that it wasn't his gardener, it wasn't his gardener. And then finally we were able to send him pictures, and then he happened to be there at the same time the gardener was there and saw him and couldn't believe his eyes. So anyway, so I think it's such a challenging situation, and all the planets have to align for things to come together on this. But I agree. I think that, and when homeowners know that's a problem, they usually take action. We've had a couple that we've interacted with lately who've been following up with us and kind of confirming that their gardener wasn't using it or was using it. So, anyway, so I think that would be very helpful to engage the homeowners more. So it's our plan.
Patrick, I had a thought kind of related to that.
Yep.
And to what Jake was mentioning too. I wonder if there's, just going to float this, if there's a way to incentivize compliance by rewarding at least the landscaping agencies that are complying. And maybe it goes on that website, on the landing page that we were just talking about, where the public can interact with it. So if they do receive a citation or a warning that their landscapers have been using or have not been complying, then we can say, go to this website and you can find a list of those agencies that do comply, and then kind of help them make that transition, which maybe puts a little bit of friendly pressure on the landscapers to comply as well.
So I don't know that we could do that kind of an incentive. I think that would be really hard because for a couple of reasons. One is sometimes people might get one, like, do people end up on that list if they only get like one citation or if it's no citation? So it's really, really hard. And it's also hard because of some of the other things I mentioned in identifying and associating the people with the companies accurately. So it gets into a gray area. But we did actually talk about, I don't know if we talked about it. I talked about it in my head, that it would be kind of a nice idea to get sort like gift cards, like $25 gift cards or something, that as we're driving around and we see somebody using an electric, that we give it to them. Now, again, that's problematic because they could have their buddy in the back using a gas powered one and we don't see them. So, so it is a bit of a catch-22. It's a difficult situation, but I agree that there's probably, in addition to the sustainability scholarships, which encourages them to buy the right stuff, I think there's probably other ways to recognize people that are trying to do the right thing. So I think we can think more about that, but I do think that the gift card thing is probably a pretty easy thing that we could do. Although, again, it gets into this challenging situation where I have the list of all of the violations that have been issued, and I can see them one day using gas or one day using electric, and then giving them a card, and they've got 6 outstanding violations. So anyway, so I think it would be a little bit tough, but again, I think that there should be some way that we can recognize those folks for doing good. So I know that that's one of the challenges that people in the gardening community have stated, is that there's really no incentive for them to do the right thing because they see other people getting away with it and not doing the right thing. So that's the challenge that we face. So, all right.
What about, could I add just one more thing? What about developing a list of like approved gardeners? Like, as opposed to incentivize, but just saying, okay, well, if you're new to, because you've just said that there's been an immense number of turnover, there's new people that are here, we create a repository, kind of like a preferred purchasers, like sort of list that like you would then have a list of, and I realize that this is probably not something you can do right away, but directionally, like, okay, let's start consolidating those that apply for the license, those that we know. Maybe we go out and do a spot audit, and then that they're on this list so that it kind of starts to resolve itself. And then you're on a banner page so that people will then go to you. So your incentive is more business because they could find you.
Right. So I think that would potentially go back to whether or not we could get the gardeners listed as having a business license. And so we got it on that list first, and then I don't know what the protocol are for revealing whether or not somebody has been issued a citation. So in order to not say that somebody hasn't been issued a citation, we'd have to identify those that have. And so I don't know if we can do that or not. But I agree. I've always felt like there should be a way that we could promote those people that are doing the right thing. And in particular, there's one guy who actually used his sustainability scholarship money to buy an electric lawnmower, electric trimmer, and other sorts of equipment. And he totally took full advantage of the state incentive program and everything. And he did it for health reasons. And I would love to get his name out there. And we are going to do that as part of the sustainability scholarship thing. But anyway, so yeah, so I think we can think more about that in terms of how we do that, but we do have some limitations when it comes to revealing some of that information. So, okay, so the other couple of things on the list, any other comments or questions about holding homeowners accountable? We would probably look at this similar to the way that we handle vacation rental violations. And if people have a vacation rental, it would probably be a strikeable offense. If people don't own a vacation rental, they would essentially be issued a citation after their gardener was issued a first citation. That would be the first notice to the homeowner, and then the second would be a citation for both of them. So that's how I would envision that working, because the common criticism of that approach of holding homeowners accountable is that How would I ever know that my gardener is using this equipment? Well, if he's been cited once, then that's your notice and to be on the lookout for it. So anyway, so that's our kind of proposed approach on that front.
Yeah, Patrick, just sort of to tie to that about notice, and maybe this is already done, but work with the vacation rental stakeholders group and maybe do a presentation at one of their the monthly stakeholders meetings, just to remind them, because given the large number of vacation rentals in town, essentially the people who are in charge are not the homeowners, but actually the vacation rental managers. Those are the ones generally who are hiring out the gardeners and are supposed to be there, you know, doing the supervision, while the homeowner may be hundreds, if not thousands of miles away.
Great point. Great point. I didn't know there such a group existed. So
no, there's the vacation rentals. They meet monthly just to discuss. Veronica would be your go-to person there,
okay.
And speak with her. And I'm sure she would love to have some visitors, and you can do a presentation on that, and maybe let people know that this is coming along. And they tend to prefer carrots as opposed to sticks, and cooperation as opposed to fines and enforcement. So.
Right.
I think they'll be receptive, and maybe you can, you know, get more compliance, voluntary compliance, by working closely with that group.
That's a great point. Thank you. All right. We have talked about increasing fines for second and third offenses to kind of raise the bar for compliance. So that's still on the table. Been some concerns about if this is too much money, but again, I don't. I think that what I've seen is that there aren't a lot of repeat violators, and the ones that are repeat a lot and just don't pay their fines. So so this could be a one thing to help deter things. Improving the documentation process. This is a tricky one too. I'm not sure how we go about doing this. I don't know that we got any great input from our, again, our internal conversation on Thursday, but it's definitely something we have to look into. And I don't know if our move to more electronic processes is going to help this. So maybe people out in the field are going to be carrying iPads instead of writing things down. I'm not sure. So that's something that I'll work internally more on. In terms of how we capture that information. And it's related to the business license issue too, because if we have a solid business license for somebody, we have their information. So getting more people on the ground is another challenging thing. As you guys may have heard, code enforcement may be requesting more staff. So to primarily cover vacation rentals and cannabis calls. But again, I think that if we get more people on the ground, then the more likely it is we're going to catch folks. And we also talked about perhaps using the citizens on patrol as part of this process. They can't issue citations, but they can be part of the process in terms of identifying violators and perhaps calling code enforcement and being there when code enforcement arrives, so that code enforcement doesn't necessarily have to see them doing it, but rather it could rely on the community on citizens on patrol to provide that data. So that's one thing. And then the last thing is something that I've heard from gardeners actually, and I think this may have come up during the development of the ordinance. They requested that that gardeners be allowed to start earlier because the discharge rate for the electric units is faster when it gets hotter. So they don't last as long in the extreme heat. And that is true. And so maybe allowing them to start at 7 a.m., which I think currently they're only allowed to start at 8 a.m., could help in that respect, is to give them another hour in the cooler weather. So anyway, any questions, concerns, or additional thoughts about how we can improve this process?
Hey, Patrick, it's Carl. When I read that in your report, it caused me a little agita knowing the house behind me for years have always started at 7. I've gone out there with printed documents saying you cannot begin until 8 p.m. And of course, they don't speak English, and I tell them that in Spanish, and then they just cuss at me and keep doing what they're doing.
Right.
Because of the
I-
noise. I mean, it's so extremely loud. First thing in the 7 a.m.
Right.
Oh, give me a break.
Right. And what's interesting, I think, is that I think most people are under the impression that it actually does start at 7 a.m. And when I saw a recent posting on Nextdoor, somebody asked that question, every single answer that came back was 7 a.m. So I think that's kind of the default start time, even though it's not the start time that's in the ordinance itself. So, anyway.
At the 1PS meeting last week, Lisa Middleton said that at the June 10th council meeting, there's going to be a discussion about the leaf blower ordinance and its effectiveness. Is this the content for that discussion?
So this is what I will say about that. So we have been asked, the staff have been asked to try to project out farther in advance the topics that may come up at council meetings. And what I'm finding is that is what should be a more of a planning resource for us internally, is more being used as a communications tool. So I don't expect that we will be ready on June 10th. I think that perhaps later in the month, or I was thinking probably more like July, because what I would like to do is have a fairly comprehensive package that goes forward to council that is a little bit more definitive than what you have before you. And I would probably like to run it by 1PS as well to get some feedback from them. So I don't know that we're going to make that June timeframe. And we meet every Monday after the council meetings to talk about the schedule. So we can adjust that. I can adjust that with them next week.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts about leaf blower enforcement? Okay. So and I do want, if you have any objections or concerns about these things beyond what you've raised right now, let me know. I very much want to go forward in a transparent way and make sure that the council commission is supportive of these ideas. So, and I appreciate the additional feedback. So what I'll do is I'll maybe type up some more information based on our conversation today and get that back out to folks and start to socialize that a little bit more, and also do the additional work internally to coordinate with folks. So, all right, great. So that's all I have on that. So the next topic is the Sustainability Scholarship and Home Energy Assessment Audits and Feedback. We just had a couple more additional folks apply. Tracy, did we have, do you have one more that we assigned this last go round?
Yeah, not a tremendous amount of activity since last month. I believe the Gerber compound, which was a composting bin, an electric leaf blower, and also DA Computer with their water efficiency system were the new ones since last month. And then Patrick and I are doing outreach both with visiting businesses in person and also on the phone for a variety of sustainable issues, and one of them being offering the scholarship program as a resource for businesses. So hopefully this list will be much longer next month.
We're especially targeting restaurants because we're reaching out to them because of various compliance issues and the foodware ordinance. So, all right. So the next topic on our agenda was the greenhouse gas inventory report. And I wanted to actually share with you, I had mentioned in the memo that I was going to get an updated version of that 2020 look ahead. And I did get that. So the thing that I asked Placeworks to do is to go back and take a look at electric vehicle adoption in the city. And they were able to find some additional data that showed that we were basically ahead of the average. So they incorporated some additional electric vehicle usage information into our calculations. So as you will see down below, So they basically, what they do is they identify the number of electric vehicles, and then they deduct from that the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted as a result of electrifying the vehicles, so charging them. So when they did that, they found that we reduced our emissions by another 3,700 metric tons. So it helped our reduction total in the end. So anyway, so it just sort of helps our story. So I wanted to see if any of you had any questions or comments about that draft memo for the 2020 look ahead. We are going to be doing a press release and an announcement about it later on. So so keep it under wraps for now, but we're pretty excited about the results, especially with regard to the way that Desert Community Energy really impacted our numbers. So again, we'll be talking more about that, making more of an announcement about it later. But anyway, I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions or comments about that look ahead that we can address.
Patrick?
Yep.
Over there. Two comments. First of all, thank you, and thank you particularly Tracy for the bar graph, because I think that that tells the good story of where we are, and of course the great news is that we have achieved the initial goal of keeping emissions at the 1990 level. Looks like we're even a little bit below that. Even better news, but obviously there's so much more to go, and you know, we need to focus on that. So I think that's a really critical message. And of course my question, and we can continue our discussions at our committee meeting, is sort of next steps and to make sure that we get this in front of council before the break. And as you know, I'll talk about that, working on some materials, but I think we need direction. I think the answer is that the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, we've kind of done, and that's great. There'll be some, you know, additional reductions from Title 24, and I'll just talk about that, and state sort of goals on EVs, and replacing gas, you know, combustion engines. So there are things that, you know, are happening, but those are largely at the margins, and we need to sort of, you know, have a hard look at what the city can do independent of state policy to work towards those goals. It's the International Energy Authority just put out a notice saying that basically have to put out something as big as the world's largest solar plant every day for like the next 10 years, just to sort of not fry ourselves by 2030. And that's sobering information. You know, that's at the macro level, but once again, we need to discuss what we can be doing at the micro level here in Palm Springs.
Yeah, I agree. And this really gives us a springboard to have that conversation, I think, and really look at, I think we would be remiss if we just focused on building related emissions. I think we really need to think creatively about transportation related emissions.
And then also, we haven't discussed this at the recently, and I'm looking at Commissioner Baker, but also make sure that this information is fed in to the general plan update group, to make sure, because we're talking about, you know, transportation and buildings, but in the sense of building where people are actually working, so that we can reduce, you know, the need for people to get in their cars to go everywhere. And that's a planning, that's more planning than sustainability. But I'd like that message to go out to the other folks as well.
Yeah. Jake.
And thank you. On the planning side, I've found I have some friends that are going through a renovation right now, and they have a house that only has one car garage, and the planning department has now come back to them and said that it's city code to have a 2-car garage for a single family home. And I didn't know, like, I mean, in general, like city planning, sometimes when you build new developments, there's always a parking requirement, et cetera. I didn't know if anyone had heard of anything like this or had been sort of like what we're doing to kind of internally, kind of in terms of our own house in order, like thinking about discordant policy that might otherwise stipulate the demand for more driving versus not. and just thinking more collaboratively as we build relationships within the community and the city to be in line with what we're trying to achieve as a city target. And so I just am sort of throwing that out there.
Yeah, I've never heard of that requirement. That must be for new construction. Because I
They're
can't.
doing, yeah, interesting,
believe
because
it.
it's a renovation.
Yeah, I can't believe that you would be required to add a garage.
A
space.
garage, right?
Yeah.
Unheard of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll ask about that though. That's an interesting question.
Thanks.
And I would also say that the circulation element of the general plan is being updated. It's in the process of being updated.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been paying attention to that from a biking perspective, but I think generally we need to be tuned into that moving forward, just because I think it'll have a lot of implications.
Oh, right. Which is back to, and also something we talked about when we met on Thursday, where if the city pursued something bigger that wasn't just about one particular mode of mobility, but about cross-functional, like signing up for the net zero commitment, where we're looking around safety, since we have a lot of neighborhoods that are underserved with sidewalks, and a lot of more people are out walking around on the streets, and you have to, like, luckily we don't have a lot of busy streets, but still they're wide and you can navigate your way, but they're pretty wide and there's no sidewalk. So it's just, I think that would be another way to kind of increase options for people and just show a message to the community that it's not just around improving our greenhouse gas inventory, but it's also around sort of the livability, walkability, and modes of transportation for our citizens and community.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Rob for the next one, right? Night Sky.
Yep. So we are basically overtaken by events right now as far as the documentation that exists in front of you. I discovered in the last month that the City Council passed an ordinance 2042. And basically what it does is it's setting up a new oversight committee for new construction. And I don't think the committee is in place yet, but it's being staffed right now. Correct me, Patrick, if you have an update on that. But it's going to be a new committee, and so there's going to be more oversight and more complete oversight of new construction projects, and that includes their lighting codes. So that's one thing that's impacting. The other is that that Ordinance 2042 makes several references to the latest Cal Energy code, and Cal Energy also deals with outdoor lighting and has regulations. And David Friedman told me last week that in fact those are going to be beefed up in 2022, I believe, beyond what they the version of the document I have now is 2019. And so both of these developments are impacting our Palm Springs Municipal Code, section 932100, excuse me, which is our existing section on nighttime lighting regulations. So these three things are interacting with each other. And so I am currently trying to digest all that. And I'm going to be putting together an update to our document that hopefully we can bring forward to city managers and city council at some future date. Boy, that brought the meeting to a halt.
Right, David had a question.
Well, more of a comment, and Rob and I exchanged a bunch of emails last week, and I sort of updated it. The concern that I have is the concern I often have is that you have one set of rules in the zoning code, that section that Rob just cited, an entire another set that are in the municipal code, which are the energy code, which are embedded in the municipal code. You have to go, it just says it's adopted. And the question that I have is who's in charge? Are the planning people looking at the provisions of the zoning code, talking to the building division people in charge of the building permit, because that's all part of the permit process? And do they talk to each other? What happens if there are conflicts, etc.? My sort of expectation is that because the zoning code provisions have not been updated in quite a few years, it looks like, they are substantially superseded, contradicted, preempted by mandatory provisions of the energy code. And as Rob just mentioned, I'll talk about that, they are going to get stricter in another roughly year and a half. So this is another way where people just need to be talking to each other, and maybe you want to have that conversation with folks in building and planning, and then Rob sort of participate so that he can then try to figure out the sort of the path forward. But what needs to be done before anything goes to council is a substantial review of the existing rules and a reference to the energy code, the building code incorporating the energy code, but also sort of getting rid of what literally is not enforceable. There are things like, you know, sodium lamps and stuff like that that I simply don't think are authorized anymore. You know, the energy code is strict and is getting stricter. So I think there's a substantial, for Rob to come up with a path forward. I think, and then this is, I think, what Rob is trying to do, but I think you need to get staff involved to assist Rob in sort of understanding what's left to be done, because otherwise it's just, I think, not an efficient use of his time and then your time and staff's time. So I would ask that you kind of shepherd that and sort of help Rob out, because it's rather tricky trying to figure out where one code talks to the other.
Okay, what I would maybe add to that, David, is I would agree with 90% of what you said and maybe dissent with 10%. The 10% is, I think, Patrick, the best path forward at this point is, let me get a new document together, because I'm going to juggle all these three and I'm going to look at them and I'm going to see where there might be discrepancies between them, and then come up with a path forward. That then I think we should go to the different organizations within the city with that document, because out of it, for example, is going to come a recommendation still that we do a modification to the Palm Springs Municipal Code section that isn't directly addressed or impacted by any of these other two documents. Basically, I'm going to be making a recommendation that we do go for a property level luminance cap on outdoor lighting, and that's not part of any of these other two. So I think I can put it all together, and then we should start going out with it.
That's trickier than you think, Rob, and you'll need to sort of look at, because you're dealing with the energy code.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, once again, staff and maybe even the city attorney, that you understand that what we're allowed to do without it triggering Energy Commission approval. I think you can do that, but there are provisions in the energy code about essentially adding on top of things. And you're talking about the municipal code, you're essentially doing an add-on to the energy code. And so I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying that's trickier than you think, because the state regulates all this stuff.
Okay, point taken.
You know, more power to you. I think you're taking on an awful lot of work to try to do that reconciliation. It absolutely needs to be done. And my hat's off and my condolences for you to take on that assignment.
Well, I'll be keeping my focus pretty narrowly on outdoor lighting.
Okay.
So I think that's going to help a little bit with the level of complexity.
Okay. Well, good luck is all I can say.
Roy, do you have a question?
Wanted to put this in a little bit different perspective. When Rob first presented the report in March, we had a long discussion, and what we ended up with is making a recommendation that basically staff coordinate with planning staff to look at the zoning code and determine what needed to be amended to cover new construction and retrofits, specifically with regard to outdoor lighting. And we voted on that. That's what we wanted to do. I think what's happened is it's become more complicated because of this new Ordinance 2042, which is in the municipal code and involves the building department. But nonetheless, I think the process that we envisioned at that time still holds. And I'd be willing to work with Rob on that as well.
Thanks, Roy. Appreciate that.
All right.
I thought 2042, and I just don't have a chance to get in front of me. I thought that was basically just revising the planning process, and I thought that was just changes. I thought that what's now going to be called the Architecture Review Committee was the old Architecture Advisory Committee, and essentially it changes some of the what used to be Planning Commission role is being passed. A lot of it's being passed to the Architecture Review Committee, but I didn't think that it was a new body, but rather simply the AAC reconstituted and remissioned and given additional tasks. So you might want to take a look at that. I don't have 2042 in front of me, but my recollection from council discussions was that it was largely for the zoning code procedures and does not change the municipal code. But once again, I appreciate anything of the Roy and Rob you want to do, but perhaps some staff input would be helpful as well, just so that you're not spinning your wheels and you're on the right path.
That was my expectation.
Great.
Right. So last new business item is the foodware ordinance update and discussion. So as you know, council approved the draft ordinance, but had some questions and clarifications that need to be made before we bring it back to them. And I wanted to outline some of those for you and get your input on them, some more than others. So the first one is, I'm going to pull this up here. So the first one, as you may have recalled, we made an allowance in the ordinance for some disposable foodware to be used, things like paper wrappers and sleeves and bags and foil wrappers and napkins and things like that. And that was consistent with some of the other ordinances that we had seen. The question came up as to whether or not that list was exhaustive and if we needed to do anything else with that list. So my impression from reading some of the other ordinances is that that list is to be pretty narrow. And I think what we could do here is add a statement at the end to say something about if there's something that somebody wants to use, it would be subject to approval by the city. So my inclination is to leave this language similar to or the same as what it is right now, and have it be a fairly comprehensive list. And then if people have something else that they want to put forward as a suggestion or a request, that they could do that potentially. So,
So the language says examples, so it's not saying this is an exhaustive list.
right.
So
Right.
language itself leaves wiggle room.
So where do you see the word example?
I'm just looking at examples from other cities include.
Oh, yes. So that is the language. A and B are the language in two other cities' ordinances. So for example, the first one, disposable foodware such as, that seems like an example list to me. But then the other one, B, seems like it's a comprehensive list. So it shall only be served using reusables, except that foodware, or I'm sorry, sleeves, bags, foil wraps, and plate liners shall be allowed. So there's a slight variation in the language there that I think one seems more definitive than the other.
And it seems like B is in the existing draft ordinance, which you have up above.
It's very similar to what we have, yes.
So are you saying you just want to add a parenthetical, for instance, under B, you could change prepared food vendor shall be used only between foodware and except.
It would be something like except the disposable blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
unless otherwise identified, approved by the city or something like
Something
that.
like that. Yeah, just simple clause at the end.
Yeah. All right. And so this is actually related to a couple of other things on here. So for example, the next one had to do with chlorinated chemical limit. So we had included in the original ordinance that the compostable foodware should be fluorinated chemical free or have no added fluorinated chemicals. But actually, I think that applies to any sort of fiber-based paper product. So it's not just things that are designated as officially compostable, but actually anything that is a paper product can potentially have this in it. So I am inclined to make that fluorinated chemical-free language more broad to make sure that it encompasses all the paper-based products that could be used. So. And that is somewhat related to the one above in that all of these things, or most of the things that we would be accepting for use would kind of fall into that category, like food wrappers and sleeves and bags, et cetera. So let me skip to the to this one, is potentially add a condition that disposables must be recyclable or compostable. So this one, again, it's sort of related because we're talking about products in the first item that would essentially could be composted if they were the appropriate material. So when we talk about things that are compostable, we included, we didn't say that things had to be compostable in our ordinance, but if they were compostable, then they had to meet a certain compostability standard and be fluorinated chemical free. So we've had some ongoing conversations with Burtech about this. Burtech is the company that handles our waste material and our organics and will be handling our organics. And so they have not been very clear about what they will or won't accept, but they have been pretty clear that they don't want foodware. So regardless of whether or not the things that we suggest that people use are compostable, they aren't going to get composted. So we have this a little bit of a dilemma in the sense that if we require things to be either recyclable or compostable, they're not actually going to be composted for the most part, and they won't even be accepted. So I'm hesitant to require that things be compostable. I would be more inclined to say that they are fiber-based or mostly because if we're trying to steer people away from plastic, fiber-based materials are maybe better than that. But again, it's a kind of a relative badness situation. So that's one of our challenges with regard to the compostability of products. And I also don't know if, for example, like a paper tray liner, if you could even get a paper tray liner that necessarily meets certain, ASTM standard for compostability. So again, it's a challenging thing to specify the products. And since we don't have access to industrial composting, it makes it harder for us to steer people in that particular direction. So I'm going to stop babbling for a minute and see if you guys understood that or have any thoughts about that, just the first piece of that, the compostability piece. And this came up as a result of Mayor Holstage's comment about suggesting that we specify that things be recyclable and compostable. So Jake, get your hand up.
Ooh, so you were mentioning that someone won't accept or compost compostable expendables?
Disposable foodware, yes. So,
And that-
so this is pretty much an industry standard. There are very few places that will accept compostable foodware for a variety of reasons. But part of it is that the ASTM standard is a longer hold time than most operations will handle. And so you end up just having this material that sits in the pile and then has to be extracted from the pile eventually and just landfilled.
Okay.
So I think generally speaking, I think the argument for pushing people towards either more bio-based materials or compostable materials is that from a litter perspective, it might be a better option to have something like that sitting on the ground as opposed to a piece of plastic, which never really goes away. So
Yeah, and I would argue that it's better to remove fossil-based anything. And so if you're replacing it with a fiber-based something, even if it takes a longer time to degrade, it'll eventually degrade, where a plastic just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and becomes a microplastic and becomes a bigger problem. So yeah, I think directionally it makes sense. And then hopefully then at some point, the systems will get better industrially, that they can maybe accept these things.
right, or maybe the products advance to a certain point where
they can break down faster.
Really does,
right.
Yeah, it does actually add some benefit. So that's great.
Interesting.
That's a good point. All right, any other questions about the compostability question? So basically, I'm having a follow-up conversation with Burtech, and I'm trying to schedule that now. So I will have a little bit more information on this because they have indicated, and we are promoting that food soiled paper can be put in your compost bin. And so what I need to understand from them is what is the extent of food soiled paper. So if I can get some clarity on that, then that may help us kind of further define what's acceptable here and what's not. So, all right. So next point is about the recyclable products. So this actually is a little bit easier because I did go through, what I did was I basically went through my cupboards and found all of the takeout ware that I was getting, and I captured pictures of those or found them online and sent them over to see, to verify that these things are recyclable in our system. Again, if they're clean and they go into your home compost or home recycling bin, there are actually several things that could be recycled, including a lot of the containers that you're getting, both from the grocery store and from takeout ware, like the clear plastic tubs are typically a number 5 and they're recyclable. And then the number 1 and 2 clamshells and other containers, those are also potentially recyclable. And then, but that's really it. So it's mostly like 1, 2s, and 5s, but that's what the bulk of a lot of the items are, especially if we get rid of polystyrene. So that was the other option. But anyway, so I feel a little bit more comfortable about saying that things have to be recyclable, as more comfortable than I am about the compostable piece. The problem area that we get into is cups. So as I mentioned here, the most common plastic cup is number 1, and but a number 2 cup is the only cup that can be sorted out in the processing system. So if we require that everything be recyclable, it means that I believe that we would have to eliminate number 1 cups, which is what everybody uses, and point them to a number 2 cup, which I don't know has the same properties as a number 1 cup. I think it's less rigid. So, so that's something I have to look into a little bit more, but again, that would probably be our primary problem if we tried to specify recyclable. Roy, did you have your hand up?
Why is it that the cups number 1 can't be sorted in the system?
Because they are sorted optically, and the optical sorter does not recognize a number 1 cup.
Because
I have no idea why. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me that it could sort out a number one bottle and not a number one cup.
It
So,
seems-
yeah. So very strange. And so that's part of the problem with the whole recyclability thing. It's not just that the material is recyclable, but it's also that it can be separated out in the system that we have. Yep, Carl.
So how's this working for national chains? I mean,
In what sense?
Starbucks going to have a Starbucks cup no matter what we tell them we want.
So the nice thing about what we're doing is that since our ordinance is reflective of the ordinances that other cities have passed, that they've already started to have some of these conversations. So I think in large part, Starbucks is researching or moving towards all fiber-based foodware. So I think you may stop seeing some of the plastic cups that they use and maybe in favor of more fiber-based products. So that's a really good question. I actually sent a note to the Starbucks people this morning to see if I could set up a meeting with them this next week to talk about it. So, all right. Any other questions, comments about this one? So again, I'm trying to get some more information here on this front as well. So I might have some additional info for us here soon. So, all right. So the other thing I wanted to do with you was confirm a couple of other items on here that need to be clarified. So one was this language in there that we were promoting this idea that foodware accessories are available only on demand or only on request. And so the question came up in the meeting if whether or not a vendor asking you if you wanted a accessory, if that qualified as by request only. And so I think my thought had been that, well, it's a question, it's been asked and answered, that sort of makes sense to me. But as we were having more discussions with our consultant, they were basically nodding their head, just like Jake, which is that no, it's really not the same thing. And so really the impetus or the idea here is that the default is not giving anything out unless it's actually asked for, because if people are asked if they want it, they tend to say yes, and they get it anyway. And so anyway, so this one to me is a really tough ask in terms of our demographic and tourism influx of people. So like, I think it would be easier if we had a more static population where we could educate the population and get them in this mindset. I think it would be a little bit easier than having people come in from out of town all the time and trying to educate them on this process. And so I don't, in my feeling about this is that if somebody doesn't ask, it seems like it would be a logical thing for the vendor to follow up to say, hey, just want to make sure you don't want this, or do you want this? So anyway, so, and I can't imagine enforcing this, right? So how would we ever, I don't know. It just seems very problematic to me to just have it be request only in one direction. So, so Jake.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think that it's sort of, I mean, I think the same way that you go to places now and it's around asking for a glass of water versus a water just being naturally there for you that would sit there and otherwise get thrown away. Mm-hmm. And so yep. One might also lend themselves to say, well, obviously I need takeaway eating utensils because I'm getting takeaway. So, however, it seems to me that one of the biggest infractions that we have is this film that then covers these these plastic utensils. So if in fact those utensils and the materials that were being given away weren't an issue, then I think it would kind of resolve itself. But right now, until you kind of limit the plastic film and the types of utensils that are being given to people that go with this takeaway, I think that's the problematic piece. And so I think has that been sort of explored in terms of like why there's more of a firm request to not offer it, since it's just sitting in people's drawers and people just don't use it? Or so it's more of a, I understand it's complicated and it's probably not a very easy like yes or no unless that's just how you're aligned, but I just am curious if that how they are exploring it.
So the basic argument behind this, and the reason that vendors have said that they provide them regardless, is that they don't want to face the wrath of somebody coming back and saying, I got all the way home and I didn't have any utensils, I couldn't eat this. So that is the only argument that I've ever heard from anybody on this front. And so, so that's the only thing that I've heard about in terms of the questioning and the affirmative response. And honestly, the response sometimes doesn't even matter. Like you can say, no, I don't want this, but it ends up in your bag anyway. So that's the kind of thing that we have to look out for too in terms of education. But and then in terms of utensils are hard too, because nothing can be done with them, right? So there, you can't do anything with them. And we haven't really talked about the packaging of the utensils at all, just really trying to limit the use. So anyway, Greg, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to, agree with you that half the time that I say I request that I don't get the utensils, I end up with them in my bag when I get home.
Right.
But if the staff at the place has been taken through a training where the last thing they ask is, do I need utensils? And I say no, then I don't get them. So I think there's something to having the restaurant staff take ownership for that. Because when I request it, I mean, it's hard enough to get them to listen to what food I actually want, let alone that I don't want utensils.
Good point. All right, Jim.
So along those lines, I'm not clear, is it still against the rules to bring your own coffee cup? Is that a Southern California thing or is that a COVID thing? Because they will not allow you to use your own coffee cup anymore. And I've only experienced that down in Southern California.
It's been a COVID thing from my understanding.
Is that going to be eliminated or is that?
Well,
no?
I don't know that it's a written COVID thing. It's just, I think some vendors, a lot of vendors have basically defaulted to that. I have never seen that written anywhere. I've never seen it said that you should, turn people away from that. And you still are going to places where you can refill a cup in like a soda cup.
Yeah, I've been given the paper cup and they just dump it into my ceramic cup and then throw the paper cup away.
Yeah.
Is normally how they do it, but I don't know. It's frustrating.
Yeah. So for this one, the way that it's written is that it should be on by request only. I don't have a problem with vendors asking the question. I don't know that we need to write it into the ordinance. So it should be by request only. I don't know. Do we have to? I don't know. I'm struggling with this because I don't want to. I don't want to deter vendors from asking the question. So if it's going to be illegal for them to ask the question, I don't really want to write it that way. Roy, you're muted.
Perhaps this is something that could be covered by the consultants that you propose hiring to help roll out the ordinance. I don't think it should be into the ordinance either, but perhaps that could be training that the consultants could help with.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah. All right. Any other questions on this front? All right. Well, I'm going to do some more talking and asking around about this, and I'll figure something else and bring it back to the group. Confirm the definition of plastic. So this is another element of the ordinance that we had talked about before, and I feel like the world has changed a little bit in the information arena. So originally we had left room for people to use compostable plastics. So the PLA and the corn-based material that again, as Jake was saying, isn't petroleum based. And so that's how we define plastic as being petroleum based. The two things have happened. One is there was a really interesting article by somebody who's involved in this field and who had surveyed or engaged a variety of perspectives on this topic and went through the different issues associated with compostable plastic. And basically what it comes down to is that people aren't composting this. Like there are so few places that will actually take this and do something with it, then that having that moniker of compostable plastic is really misleading. The other thing that our consultant mentioned is that Cal Recycle might be actually coming out with some more formal statements about bioplastics and the compostability question, because I think there was also a marine biodegradable or marine compostable topic or a moniker that's being used as well that they're trying to scale back on. So anyway, so I feel like two things about this. So one is we know that it can't be composted in our system. So having it be compostable plastic versus another plastic that may be recyclable, may be better to have it as a recyclable plastic than a compostable plastic. So the other thing is that there's certainly a lot of debate about the environmental advantage of compostable plastic. So you're using corn-based material that could be used for food and or used in other ways. And so anyway, so I think there's a lot of things are questionable about the compostable plastic, the compostable plastic world. So this is something that I think part of the reason that we kept this in there was plastic straws. And I think this is really the big thing that would probably come into play, because I think there are suitable alternatives for some other materials. But when it comes to straws and straws that don't disintegrate rapidly, like the paper-based straws, then compostable plastic straws seem like they are the go-to material. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this and see how strongly you feel about this in terms of whether or not we eliminate compostable plastic or continue to allow it in our ordinance. See, these are hard questions, right?
Well, I'll speak up again. I still feel like it's worthwhile keeping compostable plastics in there because I feel like the technology is going to evolve and could potentially address some of its shortcomings, where I find that there's little to no benefit to using petroleum-based plastics. Because I think that when we consider what we're all trying to achieve, which is net zero emissions by 2050, we don't want to be reliant upon any sort of fossil fuel or its sort of subsidiary. So that's just my opinion, but I think it gives room for the technology and the space to grow, where I think that otherwise just eliminating or leaving it open to any kind of plastic, is that the case? Maybe I'm missing the point, but I think that the difference between bio-based plastic versus compostable plastic, I guess, is that the question?
So the question is whether or not we allow, so the question is that we've limited the term plastic to be petroleum-based plastic. So it allows room for other sorts of plastic material that aren't petroleum-based. And so the question is whether or not those non-petroleum based plastics really add any value to what we're doing here, or if they really just perpetuate the myth that something is compostable when it is in fact not.
Right.
Yeah.
So then what would be the alternative? No plastics altogether, and then we wouldn't allow any plastics at all?
So it would be, so I think the only reference to this is in regard to, I have to look to see where it's referenced. It's definitely referenced in regard to straws. So it says that all straws must be non-plastic. So that's one piece. And then the other one was, there was something else that is also non-plastic, but I can't remember what it is. So it's primarily a straw issue. Yes.
So maybe we just say no straws or
Right.
fiber-based straws.
Only fiber-based straws. Right. Right. That would be the alternative. And that would be the implication if we did include bioplastics in the definition of plastic, is that all straws would have to be fiber-based, which is what
Could you do both?
a lot of cities are doing.
Right.
So I would probably have to make a couple of exceptions to this for a couple of businesses because of their unique business nature. So, anyway. All right. So other people's feelings about going to including or not the bioplastics in our definition of plastic?
I think if it really ultimately comes down to just straws, then we should push people away from plastic altogether and just keep it fiber-based.
Okay.
If it really is, if it just comes down to straws.
Right. Okay. I'll take a look at that language and see if that is the case.
And I guess in general, maybe we should push people away from plastic altogether. I'm like torn between both sides. On one hand, it's like this transition period, it's going to be awkward until we have the appropriate technology. It might be a little bit strange. On the other side, it's like, well, maybe we just skip the awkward part and just get rid of plastics altogether. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm feeling more and more confident about at least recyclable material that is plastic. If people clean it, but that would be a pretty limited set of things if we wanted to do that. But
right, and only a very limited portion of it would truly be recycled as well.
Right. So, okay. Well, let me take a look at that language again. And again, if it is only straws, then we could move people to the more fiber-based and deal with it by exception. So if somebody has a good, strong case, then we could talk to them. So, all right. All right. So the next thing that we needed to clarify was the fee on disposable containers. So in our ordinance, I didn't realize we were breaking new ground here, but we have a fee for both cups and containers, which apparently is new. So new and novel. So we had included in our language that we would charge 25 cents per cup, per disposable cup or container, up to a maximum of 50 cents. And so council had suggested an incentive-based approach. And so I threw some language in there about having a reusable option being less expensive than the disposable option, but that gets fairly complicated fairly fast, depending on how much people order. And so I did look at a couple of other ordinances. And for example, Berkeley's is very simple. It is 25, you get a 25-cent charge for any number of disposable containers and a 25-cent credit if you bring a reusable container. So it's just 25 cents one way or the other, which makes it very easy, very smooth, and very simple. The other approach, I haven't seen, there isn't one, I don't think, that does what ours does, which is kind of set this limit on kind of a max charge. So I put in a few scenarios here, and I would probably just add to that the Berkeley model, which was basically 25 cents for disposables or 25-cent credit for reusables. So anyway, so I tried to lay out a few scenarios in here for consideration. And so I wanted to just get your perspective on this and see if you had any thoughts about how we could either kind of disincentivize or incentivize things. Deborah, can I call on you? I don't know. Am I allowed? Oh, she's coming back into the room. Sorry, I'm readmitting her. All right. So anybody have any thoughts on the charging and not charging? So just by way of additional info, there's a lot of data that says that disincentives work and incentives don't, which is why I was kind of reluctant to go the incentive route. But all the literature basically says that when you charge for something, then it makes people think about not doing that thing. But when you don't charge for something, then it just doesn't really register for them. It's not really an incentive for them to do much. So.
My only concern, Patrick, is for visitors. I mean, it's one thing when you live in a town and you know to bring your cup and you travel. But like when I travel to DC, I actually started taking this with me because there was never anywhere to get water.
Mm-hmm.
Often visitors won't have that reusable cup with them.
Right. So I think that's changing. And we were gonna work with our hospitality folks to try to get them to carry reusable cups and containers so that people had them in their room. So we're gonna try to encourage them to do that. But I agree that that is a challenge in terms of people visiting. Sandra.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think, especially with the faster service, and not fine dining, when people return to that, you got to keep it simple. These are minimum wage workers. There's a lot of people. So I like your example of the Berkeley. It's one, in and out, keep it simple. And, once it gets bureaucratic in all of these categories, people are just going to not do it in most cases because they're going to get pressure from management. You got to hurry up. You got to hurry up. So
Right.
I think it's a great model for us to pursue with that.
Okay.
And one last thing though, this is a regressive tax.
Mm-hmm.
So those with lower incomes, this affects them much more greatly than those without, and especially for fast food service, which is where just because it's not scientific, but I think a lot of lower income people would eat more frequently. They're going to be penalized more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is true. Good points. All right. Well, I will take a look at that Berkeley language, and I will talk to our consultant about bringing that forward. I think some of the more progressive folks out there are going to be a little bit sad
Yeah.
if we move away from this, but I'm kind of right there with you. When I was trying to do this table, I was racking my brain to try to figure out how to make things work out. I think the other piece of this that's important to remember is, and I don't know if you remember it when we were developing this, there was a different approach whenever you had access to a reusable cup service. So the reason that the whole language about the disposables have to be more expensive than the reusable option came about largely when you have a reusable cup service. So a vendor would charge like 10 cents for a cup, as long as that was, the disposable was 25 cents. So it all sort of made sense whenever you had the reusable cup service, but it's harder to make the math work whenever you don't have that option. So, all right. And we could revisit this when we do have a reusable cup service, if we wanted to make sure that that was highlighted or incentivized. Jake,
is this only for cups?
Nope.
You say,
well, we have it for cups and containers.
so like if I was getting takeout and I brought a bowl with a lid, then someone would put their takeout in my container?
Potentially, yes.
Because I think that that would be, because one of the things that I've really been looking into recently is like these different systems like Loop, et cetera, where there's small markets where they run pilots where you basically pay a fee for, you buy like a container that then gets put part of circulation, and then different restaurants pay into this system as well. So that like, if you're getting takeout regularly or takeaway, you're just basically getting a container that you've already paid like an initial fee into. And so I think that that would be an interesting area to explore too, considering the fact that like, you know, there is a lot of takeaway that's done because of the the tourist community. But I agree that like, I think if anything, the benefit is you get a pro if you bring your cup, but you don't get penalized if you don't have a cup.
Right.
But that's my 2 cents.
We are looking into getting a pilot for a service like that. So I sat through, Tracy and I sat through a webinar last week on this, and there are more and more companies that are emerging around this. So, so it's kind of exciting. So
who pitched to you both?
Well, they didn't pitch to us. They were giving a spiel about their business, and so, but they're all looking to expand. Like 2, I think, were East Coast based, and they're looking to expand to the West Coast, and then one of them is West Coast based, looking to just expand generally. Our challenge is that we don't have a big enough market for a lot of them.
Right.
So I had actually talked to a company called Vessel, which just does cups, and they were interested in doing something valley-wide. So, so anyway, so I think that I've incorporated that into some of our stuff. So, we'll see.
Cool.
Yep. Okay, so simpler is better is the message I'm getting. So the last point was the clarifying how people on aid programs get their fee waived. And I actually did find some better language in Arcada's example of, it's very clear that, you know, at the point of sale, you prevent a card or a voucher and you get the discount. So this hopefully will be more clear than the language that we had. All right. So I think that's it. Again, this is ongoing, and we're still trying to do some more research on this front, but I'll try to, I'm going to try to do it quickly because I think they want this back in front of them by the end of June. So I'd like to try to wrap it up as quickly as we can get some answers. So, all right. So that's all I have on that topic.
Thank you, Patrick.
The next one's mine too.
Yes.
So, all right. So I'm gonna just share. Let me see. Do I have that up? Sorry. All right. So where'd it go? There it is. Sorry, I had it up. I just couldn't see it. All right, so I wanted to share with you some budget thoughts as we're going into budget season. We are not part of the general plan, so we don't get quite as much pressure to produce budget information as some of the other offices. But I wanted to give you this to just show you how I think the next year will kind of unfold. On the sustainability side, again, we have two separate budget items. One is sustainability, one is recycling. We also have actually a third budget item, which is for air emissions related work. It's a fairly small budget. It's like $50,000. So I don't necessarily include it. I'm going to spend that money on EV chargers if I can do that. So, so on our sustainability side, again, we get about $350,000 a year. And then we've got about $700,000 in the bank. Probably after this year is over, we've got some money expected for the turf rebate program for the airport project. And then we've got personnel expenses that are sort of automatic across the board, and special charges, those kinds of things always come out every year. So we are left with about $950,000 or so to use. And so we've got the airport turf conversion project, which we're going to pay for next year, or finish paying for. EV charging stations, 110,000. Community garden work, also leaf blower rebate program, if we want to beef that up. And then some other things that are probably going to come along on the sustainability side is probably about $50,000 for additional greenhouse gas support or strategy development. And then communications and outreach, general stuff, about 30,000. And then bike infrastructure, we're setting aside $75,000 if we don't get it from Measure J, which I'll talk about in a minute. So as you can see, if we just did that, then we're left with about $430,000 at the end of the year. And I want to remind people that we're essentially working down a savings. So everything that we spend money on beyond about $100,000 a year comes out of our savings. So, so again, at the end of next year, we might have about $440,000 left in our account, and that would carry forward into the next year that we could use in the future. So those are the kind of big ticket sustainability related items that I had in mind. Then I'll go through the recycling ones, and then I'm happy to take your questions or comments about anything else that we should be thinking about. On the recycling side, we have about $10,000 a year that we spend on the household hazardous waste facility support. Trash and recycling containers. This is for work that Rob and I have been working on in terms of the parks and converting over containers, so we can use that money for that. Shredding and e-waste events is about $11,000 a year. Sustainability Scholarship Fund. We're going to dedicate a lot to foodware and organics next year. Battery collection, that costs us about $8,000, even though we have a grant. That grant is going to run out for, I think next year is the last year for that grant. And then some of that grant money doesn't quite cover all of our expenses there. A reusable cup and container pilot, consulting fees for organics and foodware, and then communication outreach. This is going to be a big one in terms of educating people about the organics requirements, as well as just general recycling, foodware changes, that kind of thing. So as you can see, recycling goes down to about a little less than $300,000. So.
How does the battery collection cost $8,000? I mean, there's little cardboard boxes.
So we pay for the containers that are the shipping containers. So that costs us money to actually get them recycled. So
where do they go?
They go to a place called Battery Solutions. And it's located in, is it in Ohio? I think it's in Ohio.
Oh, okay. Never thought about that part.
Yep. Yep.
Actually, the cost of the containers includes the processing.
Right, exactly. It's kind of a nice setup. Any other questions on those budget items, or any big items that you think we need to include here?
I do.
Yes, Rob.
Yeah, if we have those kinds of hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're not spending, yeah, I'd like to develop a program of incentives for retrofitting of outdoor lighting.
Okay.
So details obviously TBD, but yeah, it'd basically be you could go in and trade in your non-shielded outdoor lights for shielded versions, and you could trade in your low temperature LEDs for outdoor lighting for higher temperature LEDs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, also, and a third thing, Patrick, would be timers.
Time, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Jim.
Yeah, I was going to add timers to that list too. Thank you, Rob. We had talked during some of the bike subcommittee meetings about gathering some bike counter data and gathering some survey data. I think maybe it's like a couple $1,000. Does that need to be a line item, or is that petty cash kind of thing?
We could cover that out of communications and outreach.
Okay, thanks.
David?
Yeah, it may also be in communications and outreach, but the home energy assessment program, which is $10,000, which is probably all still there. Just want to make sure that's carried over into the next year. And as I said, whether that's a separate line item or it could also be in communications and outreach. Didn't want to forget that.
So that would be part of our sustainability scholarships. If we wanted to carry that forward, we could do it there.
Okay, but you'd have to maybe reduce it on the sustainability, on the recycling side, and add in 10,000 or 10,000 on top of it.
Yeah, so we'll figure out how the carryover is going to work on that scholarship program, because we do have some money left, especially on the recycling side.
And this is the thing, is completely a carryover. It's already there.
Right.
Actually, the previous fiscal year.
Right.
Just to make sure that.
So, right. And my intent with this sustainability scholarship program is to narrow the focus, because I think that we're going to need it for these two items in particular. So, and again, if we find some other kind of priority area as we're doing, especially as we talk about the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we want to do, if we identify something there, then we could also kind of set aside some money for that too. So. All right. Roy.
The item general communication and outreach, I assume that includes things like World Environment Day, the Sustainability Film Festival, the library.
Yeah, exactly.
We vote on those at the time they come up.
Right. That usually comes out of that fund.
Thank you.
Yeah. Greg. No. Okay. All right. So I wanted to mention one thing is, as basically our bank account gets lower, I'm going to start requesting money from the general fund, whether it's through Measure J or elsewhere. I think that we need to set aside a significant amount of money for water efficiency and turf conversion across the city. And so I'm going to be requesting $250,000 from Measure J for next year on for those projects. Bike infrastructure, I'm hoping to get that money from Measure J as well. And then things like fencing at the community garden also seems like it's something that should come out of the general fund or the Measure J, because it's infrastructure related. So I'm going to try to do more of that as we go forward here. But those are the three things that popped out at me as I was looking through this budget that we could probably use them as a resource for. All right, any other questions, comments on the budget?
Just to the point, also just follow up with Ashley to see if there are additional state funds that may be available in the new fiscal year for turf conversion, because I believe that's one of the sort of manna from heaven items in the governor's new budget proposal is resiliency. And so go for it. And it's not clear to me, because it's just been proposed, obviously not in the budget, whether that would flow through the water agencies or whether that would be potentially a direct request from cities. So Ashley may have some information about that. So you might want to ping her before you put in the request, or double dip, if you will. Ask for it for Measure J. And since you probably won't get all that you ask for, also follow up with Ashley to see what other sources may be available.
Our city manager thought that number was too low, by the way.
Okay, great. More power to you.
Right.
It obviously needs to be added.
Yep. All right. Okay, I'll stop there and we can go on to the next topic. So sorry this all took so long. There was a lot to talk about.
It's good that the first part of our meeting was short, because
we made up the ground, right?
Yeah, we used up the time, but these were important topics and deserved a lot of discussion. We move on to subcommittee and commissioner reports. And the first is standing subcommittee on solar and green building. David?
Okay, a lot going on. I'll try to make this as brief as possible. So you have in the meeting packet for the committee report data, Palm Springs data from the Reach Code Effectiveness Explorer, and I sort of take a look at that because we'll see it again next month. I'm going to start work tomorrow on an actual sort of hard proposal based on some of the ordinances that the Energy Commission has just approved, including one last week, that sort of gives folks a menu that if you're doing a retrofit of X amount, you can choose from different options of things that they can do. And a lot of this is a result of discussions that we had when we looked at the solar ordinance 5 years ago and realized that there's actually more GHG reductions to be gotten out of retrofitting our existing building stock from the 60s and 70s than the new stock. So we'll be focused on that with maybe one feature for new construction, which would be cool roofs for both new construction and retrofits on that. So watch this space for next month. And Patrick, my objective is to have something for a committee meeting in 2 weeks. As I briefly alluded to earlier, the Energy Commission has released the draft 2022 Energy Code, and we'll be holding workshops next week to present the proposals in advance of expected approval of its August business meeting. And then the 22 code will go into effect on January 1, 2023. The 2022 code will generally require heat pumps and pre-wiring for batteries and electric appliances in new residential construction, as well as solar and batteries in new non-residential construction. So there's a lot going on there. As Rob alluded to, there are more strict proposals on outdoor lighting, both residential and non-residential. And if there are any slides from the workshop, I will pass those along to everyone that needs to see it. The Energy Commission also issued its draft building decarbonization report under AB 3232. The report analyzes scenarios to reduce building GHG emissions by at least 40% by 2030 and identifies several strategies that will lead to significant emission reductions. The Energy Commission is holding workshops on that this coming Friday, again on Tuesday. And I'll include information from that in my proposal for the committee and then ultimately the commission. Solar app, you recall some discussions from last fall. The National Renewable Energy Lab, which is part of the Department of Energy, has launched a solar app and is working on battery storage features. And the Senate Appropriations Committee is considering a bill that would require local agencies to implement an automated solar permitting plan such as solar app, and I'll continue to monitor that legislation. Last week, I attended a webinar on converting municipal waste to hydrogen, which could be an alternative reuse for biogas at the wastewater treatment plant, and I forwarded some slides to Patrick in light of discussion on hydrogen fuel stations and to Roy, and that could sort of be taken over as part of Scour's work on reducing GHG emissions at the wastewater treatment plant. Just another sort of potential outlet for feedstock. And then finally, the California Hub for Energy Efficiency Financing is launching an on-bill repayment option under its small business financing program. There's a workshop on that on Friday morning. I'll forward the materials to Patrick, and he can add a link on the energy efficiency page. So my time is booked essentially between now and the end of the month of workshops. But just a lot going on, and these things do affect what we're doing here in Palm Springs, so it's important to stay on top of it.
Thank you. Next is Standing Subcommittee on Waste Reduction. Patrick?
Thanks. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. One is we continue to work with PSDS on SB 1383 to the franchise agreement. I'm actually feeling pretty good about the scope changes that we've talked about. We had a little back and forth, and I think we're heading into the home stretch in terms of scoping out the new services that will be offered. And then the next step is to talk about how that may impact rates. And that gets a little bit more complicated because there are a variety of different rate increases that we're also talking to PSDS about. So, so stay tuned for more on that. I'm hopeful that we can continue to move forward with our franchise agreement update on a fairly rapid pace, but we shall see. Then the residential organic survey results, they are in, we included them in the packet. I'm not going to go into great detail on them, but I did think it was kind of interesting that it did reveal where people are with some of this thinking, including the fact that I think we're going to have a real educational campaign about what organics are, what goes into the bin, what does it mean to compost, and really just how to deal with people and work with people that aren't going to generate much material. So I think that's going to be one of our big challenges, is because there is not really an exception in the state law that lets us exempt people individually. It does give us a de minimis amount for commercial generators, but it doesn't do the same thing for residential generators. So we're going to be in this unfortunate situation where there's going to be some subset of the population that probably pays for a service that they're not really going to use very much. So we're going to have to message that carefully. So anyway, that's it on information.
So are green bins a given? Do we have to have those? Because it's so kind of a disaster in San Francisco.
I believe the only exception is if you compost at your home. So if you have a home composting system, otherwise you need a container.
Right. So most people get containers that just no one puts them out.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Or you have your gardener use them. I mean, that's what I really want to push people towards, is really getting their gardener to use their green bin if they aren't already, because if they do, at least we know where that stuff is going. Whereas now we don't have as good a sense of where they take it.
Do gardeners are they given free drop off for their organic waste? Because that's kind of how it works in San Francisco, 100%. So their tipping fees are one cost for trash, but green waste is all free. And that gets about 90% of the green waste. Mm-hmm. That would be a better expenditure of money than picking up bins at everyone's houses, which is a lot of rotting food.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, that's all I have.
Thank you. The next subcommittee report is World Environment Day. Sandra or Greg, do you have any report on that? It's coming up soon.
Yes, we'd had to back it up until May 24th for a broader representation. And then on Tuesday, we'll do the orientation, which is the 25th for the judges. There was the forms had to be reformatted and that. So sometime next week, we're waiting. We'll know Monday and at the orientation when with the actual judging, but it's been expanded and it's going forward.
Thank you. The next is Ad Hoc Subcommittee on Walkability and Pedestrian Planning. Patrick?
So we're completing basically the data collection portion of the project, and we're moving into the analytical phase. We did meet with the consultant last week to talk about timelines and holding the next Community Advisory Committee meeting, which will probably be in mid-June, late June. And at that time, we'll start to review lists of priority projects or project ideas that were gleaned from the feedback that we got, and using the Community Advisory Committee to help prioritize those and analyze those, and then vet those with the community through a couple of public meetings. So that's the plan moving forward. And I think we're in pretty good shape. We've got a lot of data that we have to sift through, I think.
The consultant did send out an email that the Community Advisory Committee meeting will be June 23rd.
Right. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next is Ad Hoc Subcommittee on Bicycle Routes and Cycling.
So we did kind of have a meeting last Thursday, and Patrick touched on it, that we met with David Newell, the planning department, to give us some ideas about how we might incorporate our thoughts with the general circulation element of the general plan. I think the things that resonated there were, one of them was that I found a great bicycle plan that Oahu did for Honolulu, and they just did the exact same thing we're proposing: a cycle track on a one-way street, and it was went in a couple of years ago, and the cost of that was about $900,000. It's been pretty successful. It's a higher density city with a lot less parking, but it's a good comparison. But one of the things we also saw in there we liked is the idea of gathering some survey data about who uses bike paths, why they use them, why they're afraid not to ride bikes, or why they ride on sidewalks, and then getting some countering some misinformation about bicycle usage. I think there's some people that don't believe how many people are actually using South Palm. So getting some bike counter information we thought would be valuable. And we talked a little bit too about priorities. I think while that cycle track thing we proposed was something people are interested in, there's a lot of interest in completing the previously started South Palm Canyon bike path. So I think we're going to have another meeting to kind of brainstorm on how that might be done and how to start gathering more data. We kind of want to use some of the templates from other cities for our data gathering, and I think that'll be pretty easy thing to get a hold of. So that's what we talked about.
Thank you, Jim. The next is ad hoc subcommittee on night sky, which we've already discussed. Anything else?
Nothing else for that one.
Thanks, Rob. Then ad hoc subcommittee on strategic planning and general plan update.
No update for me on that. I hope to get back to it sometime soon.
Yes. It's become a lower priority, I think. Water conservation, David.
Thank you. DWA board met this morning. They extended the COVID fee waivers until June 15. Their June 15 meeting, which is the governor's reopening date. There's substantial unpaid water bills, and DWA staff is exploring funding opportunities to cover them. DWA staff is also pursuing funding opportunities for regional water conservation study to determine how much water turf removal and other outdoor conservation programs save, because they're relying on data from Nevada, and they want to have local desert area data on that. DWA is working with the other local water agencies on the Coachella Valley Urban Water Management Plan, which needs to be submitted to the State Department of Water Resources by July 1. The Water Shortage Contingency Plan draft, which addresses shortage response and aligns with DWR standards, has just been posted on the DWA website, and the UWMP will be posted soon. And DWA will have a public hearing on at a June 15th meeting to consider adoption of these two plans. As you probably know, California is experiencing extremely dry winter with low snowpack and little rainfall. The governor has extended the drought emergency, which now covers 41 counties, although Riverside County isn't among them. IDWA is holding a webinar tomorrow at 10 to discuss about the drought conditions in California, in the Coachella Valley, and how they're preparing. And if you don't get it live, the webinars are generally posted on the DWA website shortly after that. And then finally, DWA and its customers achieved a 7% reduction in metered potable water consumption during April of this year, and compared to the same month in the 2013 baseline year. Over the past 12 months, consumption is trending 12% lower compared to 2013 baseline. And that's it for water.
David. Wellness, Carl.
Hi. So the smoking ordinance was before the Human Rights Commission. However, due to their extended meeting discussing the Bogart statue in front of City Hall, they never made it to the agenda item, so it's been pushed to the June meeting.
Thank you, Carl. And finally, Desert Community Energy, David.
Okay, thank you. Good news, the new Terra-Gen wind project within the city limits began operation on May 4th, and there was a recent article in the Solar Trade Press about the solar PPA with Vesper in the Central Valley. The annual true-up period for solar customers ends this month. If you generate more electricity than you use, generation credits of less than $100 are rolled over to the next annual period, and credits of $100 or more will be cashed out, and then SCE will separately do a true up of its distribution charges. And I've asked DCE to post an FAQ explaining the process, because otherwise, Patrick, you're going to get questions about it. So I put that on DCE so you don't have to deal with it.
I'll have to deal with it anyway.
Okay, all right. Well, I want to push that they make sure that you don't, even if you get a question, you can just refer to the FAQ.
Good.
That's the objective. Both the legislature and the CPUC are considering changes to the solar compensation rules, which could lead to reduced generation credits from DCE and higher charges from SCE for grid access. I'm monitoring the proceeding and also asked TCE to do so through the California Community Choice Association, which is the trade organization for community choice aggregators like TCE. Senate Appropriations Committee will be considering SB 612, which would ensure that CCAs have fair and equal access to the benefits of legacy energy resources held in investor-owned utility portfolios. And both DCE and City Council sent in support letters. And then finally, the Community Advisory Committee still has 2 vacancies for Palm Springs members, and please let Patrick me know if you have any candidates, preferably for Council Districts 1 and 4, which are not currently represented on the CAC. And that's it.
Thank you, David. Our final item on the agenda is commissioner comments and upcoming agenda. So we'll go down the list of commissioners. If you have any additional comments to make or suggestions for a future agenda item, please state it. You have 1 minute each. Rob?
No comment here.
Carl?
No additional comments.
Jim?
Nothing new.
David?
No additional comment.
Sandra?
Yes, some good news, surprising, that Walmart has announced that they are going to be stopping their retailing distribution of bee-killing pesticides, neonics. So we'll see what happens, but it's very surprising, but very good news.
Very interesting. Thank you. Greg?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think as soon as we can get back together again, it might be a really good time to have a commission retreat to look at our master plan. And, that was developed several years ago. And we've got a lot of new commissioners since then. It would be great to look at the priorities in there and see if those are still our priorities and progress that we've made regarding that plan.
Thank you. Alex?
No comments for me.
Thank you. Jake?
Same, no comments from me. Thank you.
So our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 15th at 5:30.
Roy, can I ask one thing? I'm sorry, I know we're all ready to leave. I had forgotten that I had included a draft ordinance and a draft resolution in the packet. And I'm wondering if the commission is ready to vote on that ordinance and resolution tonight, or if we should bring that back at the next meeting along with the other, and this was related to the leaf blower issue. So the ordinance holds homeowners accountable, and then the resolution increases the fine amounts. So there are those 2 pieces. And so I just wonder if you guys want to talk about it more as a package at the next meeting, or if you wanted to give me a thumbs up on it now or not. I just want to throw that out there. Sorry.
Has everybody had a chance to read those documents in the package?
Yeah, it's 2 pages. Great.
Yeah.
It seems pretty straightforward because it follows along with the discussion we had tonight.
It does, yes. So, so if you're in favor of that, then I can get a thumbs up, and then I could kind of move that package forward.
Do you need a motion, Patrick?
I think I do, yes.
Okay, I'm going to move that that we recommend for adoption by City Council the draft ordinance on leaf blowers that would, in addition, amend various sections about particularly allowing or prohibiting real property owners to knowingly allow another person to use a gas-powered leaf blower.
And then there's the fine.
Yeah. That would be a resolution. Oh, that should be, sorry about that. And sorry about that. That's the 2nd page. And also the draft resolution included, the motion also includes approval, the recommendation by City Council to adopt the resolution with the fine, with the master bail schedule.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Greg. Is there any discussion?
Well, so they come together as we're voting on them together.
Yes.
Do you have a reservation or a question about one piece or another?
Well, I don't know much about fines. The increase seems a bit of an unproportional response to using a leaf blower, but I don't know the history of it. But I'm just
Okay.
spitballing here. I totally agree that homeowners can be held accountable, but the second part there, hefty fine, I think, but maybe perhaps that's what it takes. I don't know if other people here have perspectives on a proportional fine response.
Are there any other comments?
Well, I would just point out that we've had a couple years of enforcement on this and trying to get people to do it. So if we're not getting compliance, it's time to move from the carrot to the stick.
Thank you. There's no other discussion. I think we're ready to take a vote. This is one where we should have we want to make sure we get a good count. Harder on video than sitting around a table.
Well, I think I can see everybody except Rob. So
You can't see me?
no, we can't see
Your
your
camera's off.
Oh,
Okay, so why don't we just raise up hands? All in favor of the motion that David proposed? Raise your hand.
raising my hand. I don't know why my camera's off.
Okay, got it.
All right.
Everybody.
Looks like it passes.
There.
Yep.
There you
All
go.
right, great.
Yep.
And based on the conversation, if anything were to change with regard to that ordinance, I would bring it back to the group and just let you know. So. Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yep.
As I was saying, the next scheduled meeting of the commission will be at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, June 15th. And following our streamlined procedure, and will not ask for a motion to adjourn. I will, if there is no objection, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. It was a very productive meeting. Good night.
All right, thanks, Roy.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks, Roy.
thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Good night, everyone.